March 17, 1945, Ardennes forest to northern France. American medics from the 42nd Field Hospital saved 2 critically wounded German Luftwaffe pilots against direct orders, risking court-martial to uphold their medical oath. The enemy pilots who arrived expecting execution instead received life-saving surgery from the very people they'd been bombing days earlier. This single act of battlefield mercy would later help rebuild the bridge between 2 nations that seemed forever divided by war. 14 Messerschmitt Bf-109s of Jagdgeschwader 27 scrambled at first light for a desperate intercept mission. Only 8 returned by 1100 hours. Luftwaffe Major Ernst Hoffman's aircraft, callsign Adler 1, suffered catastrophic engine failure at 12,000 feet after engaging P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. American forward observer Lieutenant Michael Donovan spotted the smoke trail from his position near St. Vith. Through field glasses, he tracked the damaged fighter's descent toward the American-held sector. Radio chatter confirmed, German fighter down, grid coordinate Tango 7. The 42nd Field Hospital stood just 3 miles from the crash site. Captain Eleanor Winters ran the 42nd's trauma unit. A surgical nurse from Boston with 3 years combat experience, she'd established unconventional protocols. All casualties received treatment regardless of uniform. Medicine knows no borders, she frequently reminded her staff. This philosophy would soon be tested beyond measure. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6 carried improved DB605 engines but suffered oil pressure vulnerabilities. Hoffman's aircraft, manufactured at Regensburg in late 1944, showed signs of material fatigue. Wartime production quotas had compromised quality control. German mechanics had noted irregularities in the logbook, but critical shortages forced compromised standards. Weather conditions that morning, overcast, ceiling 3,000 feet, visibility degrading rapidly. Temperature, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Ground, muddy from recent thaws. The front line had stabilized following the Battle of the Bulge. Both sides anticipated the final push into Germany. Every aircraft, every pilot, every resource counted in these waning days of the European theater. Major Ernst Hoffman had flown 117 combat missions. His aircraft bore 37 kill markings below the cockpit. Son of a Dresden physician, he'd entered the Luftwaffe in 1939 believing in the cause. 6 years of war had eroded that certainty. His squadron briefing that morning carried a tone of desperation. Destroy the American fighters at any cost. There will be no retreat. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber flew as Hoffman's wingman. Younger, just 22, with blonde hair and a photograph of his fiancée inside his flight jacket. They'd trained together at Jagdgeschwader 4 before the war turned against them. Weber still believed victory possible. Hoffman knew better but kept this knowledge to himself. Leadership required maintaining hope, however false. The mission profile: intercept and destroy American fighter escorts before they could rendezvous with bomber formations targeting the Ruhr Valley. Tactical intelligence had identified a weakness in the escort schedule, a 15-minute window when bombers would fly unprotected. Exploit this gap, disrupt the formation, force mission abort. Reality differed from the briefing. American P-47s arrived early, already in position when the Messerschmitts entered the combat zone. The German formation split under attack. Discipline collapsed as survival instinct took over. Individual dogfights replaced coordinated assault. Tactical advantage evaporated in seconds. Hoffman engaged 3 Thunderbolts simultaneously. His experience showed in the maneuvers: tight turns, unpredictable roll rates, vertical displacements to break lock-on attempts. He damaged 1 American fighter before his engine warning light flashed. Oil pressure dropped precipitously. Temperature gauge climbed into the red zone. Metal fragments appeared in his slipstream, internal engine components disintegrating in real time. Weber witnessed Hoffman's aircraft beginning its deadly descent. Squadron doctrine: maintain mission focus, abandon damaged aircraft. Weber broke doctrine, following his leader down through the cloud layer. This decision saved both their lives through a chain of events neither could have foreseen. Private First Class Samuel Goldstein hadn't planned on becoming a medic. The son of a tailor from Brooklyn, he'd hoped for assignment to a rear echelon unit. His aptitude tests revealed an unexpected talent for emergency medicine. 3 weeks of accelerated training transformed him from draftee to combat medic. Now he drove a medical jeep through mud-churned roads, carrying plasma and morphine to a forward aid station. Goldstein had lost his cousin at Normandy. His rabbi had counseled him before deployment, "In saving lives, you honor the dead." These words replayed as he saw the distinctive black smoke of an aircraft fire rising above the treeline. Without radio confirmation, he diverted toward the crash site. Instinct overrode protocol. Captain Eleanor Winters conducted morning rounds when the call came in. 2 enemy aircraft down in their sector. Potential casualties inbound. Standard procedure dictated minimal resources allocated to enemy wounded, stabilize, secure, transfer to dedicated POW facilities. Winters had quietly modified this procedure within her unit. Her staff understood, every patient received the same standard of care. This philosophy stemmed from personal experience. December 1943, temporary evacuation hospital near Monte Cassino. Italian civilians brought a wounded German paratrooper to their makeshift triage area. The hospital commander ordered immediate transfer without treatment. Winters witnessed the man die during transport. His last words, spoken to no one in particular, "I have a daughter I've never seen." She vowed never to allow such a death under her authority. The 42nd Field Hospital operated from a requisitioned stone farmhouse and surrounding canvas extensions. 6 surgeons, 12 nurses, 24 enlisted medical personnel. Capacity, 60 beds, expandable to 100 in extreme situations. Equipment, limited but modern. Blood supplies, critically low after recent offensive operations. Every treatment decision balanced immediate needs against uncertain future casualties. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison commanded the unit on paper. In practice, he deferred to Winters in all medical matters. A physician in civilian life, he recognized her exceptional skills and leadership qualities. Their arrangement remained unspoken but clear to all staff. Harrison handled administration and military protocol, Winters determined medical priorities. This division of labor would soon face its greatest test. Hoffman fought his controls as the engine seized. Black smoke poured from the cowling. Oil pressure, 0. Coolant temperature, critical. The aircraft pitched nose down, then leveled momentarily. He jettisoned the canopy at 8,000 feet. The slipstream tore at his flight suit. Ejection systems didn't exist. Bf-109 pilots rode their aircraft down or bailed out manually. Training emphasized bailout above 2,000 feet whenever possible. Hoffman delayed, attempting to guide his stricken aircraft away from what appeared to be a village through breaks in the cloud cover. This decision reduced his survival probability but aligned with his personal code. Even enemies deserve this consideration. The impact occurred at approximately 0937 hours. The Messerschmitt struck trees before cartwheeling across a muddy field. The left wing sheared off completely. The fuselage crumpled but remained largely intact. Fuel ignited immediately. Secondary explosions from ammunition created a perimeter of danger around the wreckage. Goldstein arrived 4 minutes after impact. The scene matched nothing in his training scenarios. Aircraft components scattered across a 50-yard radius. The central fuselage burned intensely, ammunition cooking off at irregular intervals. Movement within the cockpit section, barely perceptible through flames and smoke. A human being still alive in that inferno. Standard procedure: observe, report, wait for specialized recovery teams. Approach only when scene declared secure. Goldstein disregarded every element of this procedure. Protocol said observe and report enemy activity, he later stated in his debrief. But smoke that color meant a human being was burning. He parked 50 yards away and ran toward the wreckage. The heat drove him back initially. 3 attempts failed to reach the cockpit. On the 4th, he removed his jacket, soaked it in water from his canteen, and held it before his face. This improvised heat shield allowed closer approach. He reached the crushed cockpit section, finding Hoffman still strapped in, semi-conscious, flight suit beginning to melt into skin. The German's oxygen mask had crushed against his face during impact. Blood from a head laceration mixed with leaking aviation fuel. Hoffman's gloved hands showed through the bone where he'd attempted to fight the flames. Third-degree burns covered 20% of his body already, percentage climbing with each second of exposure. Military identification remained visible on his partially burned flight suit. Iron Cross First Class. Luftwaffe insignia. Enemy combatant confirmation. Standard procedure at this juncture: secure prisoner first, then render aid if tactically appropriate. Goldstein reversed this sequence entirely, cutting through harness straps with trauma shears. Hoffman regained partial consciousness during extraction. His training asserted itself. Enemy capture meant resistance. He struck weakly at Goldstein with a burned hand. The medic continued working, speaking calm reassurances in broken German learned from his grandmother. Still. Be still. Doctor. Help. Friend. The extraction succeeded with seconds remaining. Goldstein dragged Hoffman clear of the wreckage using a fireman's carry modified for spinal protection. The aircraft's remaining fuel cells exploded 30 seconds later. The blast wave knocked both men to the ground, Goldstein's body shielding the wounded pilot from shrapnel and debris. Initial field assessment: severe burns to hands, arms, and lower face. Probable internal injuries from impact forces. Smoke inhalation damage to lungs. Survival probability without immediate advanced intervention, less than 20%. Goldstein administered morphine from his kit, established a primitive airway, and began basic burn treatment with sterile water and gauze. Radio communication reached the 42nd Field Hospital at 0946 hours. German pilot recovered. Critical condition. Request immediate evacuation. The transmission paused, then continued with unexpected clarity: he's a person, not a German right now. Multiple burn areas. Moving to extraction point Delta. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Weber's aircraft suffered different damage patterns. 20mm cannon fire from AP-47 had shredded his control surfaces without igniting fuel tanks. He maintained partial control through rudder and throttle modulation alone, executing what pilots called a controlled crash, a contradiction in terms that nonetheless described his desperate situation accurately. His Messerschmitt struck ground 2 miles from Hoffman's position, skidding through a fallow field before coming to rest against an abandoned farm implement. The impact drove the control column into his lower abdomen. His right femur snapped from compression forces as the aircraft crumpled around him. The cockpit retained its integrity, but Weber found himself trapped within the twisted metal. Sergeant Ray Martinez led a 4-man infantry patrol that witnessed Weber's crash landing. Standard procedure: approach with caution, weapons ready, secure enemy personnel. The patrol followed procedure precisely until the final moment. Weber reached for his sidearm when they approached. Martinez kicked the Luger away instead of firing his M1 Garand as regulations authorized. He wasn't reaching to shoot, Martinez explained later. It was automatic, like breathing. We'd have done the same. The distinction represented a crucial moment of human recognition transcending combat psychology. Martinez had lost his brother at Normandy but remembered his words from a letter: "We fight to prove we're better than what we're fighting against." Weber's extraction required cutting through aluminum frame components with tools from the patrol's jeep. Throughout the process, Martinez maintained direct eye contact, speaking reassurances despite language barriers. "You'll be okay, Jerry. War's over for you. Medical coming." The German pilot remained conscious, watching American hands working to save him rather than harm him. Assessment revealed a compound fracture of the right femur, the bone protruding through flight suit and skin. Internal bleeding indicated by increasing pallor and rapid, weak pulse. Abdominal injuries of undetermined severity. Martinez applied a field tourniquet and sterile pressure dressings from his combat aid kit. The patrol converted a damaged door into an improvised stretcher. Radio confirmation reached the 42nd Field Hospital at 1014 hours. 2 enemy casualties inbound. Estimated arrival, 20 minutes. Captain Winters immediately cleared 2 surgical bays and assembled teams. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached as she prepared. "Captain, resources are limited. These are enemy combatants." Winters continued preparing surgical instruments. "These are patients, sir. Medicine doesn't recognize uniforms." The exchange represented the only direct challenge to her authority that day. Harrison hesitated, then nodded once. "Document everything. I'll handle command inquiries." This simple exchange established the moral framework for what followed. The first ambulance arrived at 1029 hours. Goldstein had maintained Hoffman's airway throughout transport, manually assisting respiration when necessary. The German pilot's condition had deteriorated, burns beginning to weep fluid, blood. Pressure dropping, lung sounds indicating progressive damage from smoke inhalation. Triage assessment, critical condition requiring immediate intervention. Winters directed the team to Surgical Bay 1, calling for burn protocols and respiratory support. A nurse questioned whether plasma supplies should be reserved for Allied casualties. Winters' response became unit legend: "If you can tell me which blood is German and which is American once it's spilled, I'll consider segregating our supplies." Weber arrived 6 minutes later. Martinez accompanied the stretcher, still applying pressure to control femoral bleeding. Triage assessment, serious but stable, second priority after Hoffman. The abdominal injuries presented greatest concern, rigid abdomen indicating possible organ damage and internal hemorrhage. Winters divided her resources precisely. 2 surgical teams, operating simultaneously. Hoffman received burn debridement, airway management, and fluid replacement. Weber underwent orthopedic stabilization and exploratory laparotomy to identify and repair internal injuries. Both received American blood products without documentation of nationality in the transfusion records. Standard procedure for enemy casualties, minimum necessary treatment to sustain life, then transfer to dedicated POW medical facilities. The 42 ND's approach diverged completely from this standard. Full surgical protocols implemented. Complete pharmaceutical support ordered. Recovery beds assigned in the main ward rather than secured isolation areas. The procedures continued for 6 hours. Hoffman required extensive debridement of necrotic tissue, particularly on hands and face. Weber's femoral repair involved titanium pins developed specifically for the American field medical system, resources typically reserved for Allied personnel only. Throughout both surgeries, the medical teams maintained professional detachment. No comments about enemy status. No references to recent German offensives or American casualties resulting from Luftwaffe operations. The patients existed as human beings requiring care, their identities temporarily suspended within the surgical theater's neutral territory. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison observed portions of both procedures. His medical background allowed him to assess the quality of care provided. His administrative role demanded he consider the consequences. Resources expended on these 2 men might mean shortages for American casualties later. Yet watching Winters direct her teams with calm efficiency, he recognized something transcending military calculation. "This is why we fight," he noted in his personal journal that evening. "Not just to defeat an enemy, but to preserve something worth defending. I witnessed that principle in action today. 2 men who hours earlier tried to kill our boys received the full measure of our medical capability. This represents victory more profound than any territorial gain." The surgeries concluded successfully. Both pilots stabilized. Recovery began under the watchful eyes of nurses who treated them identically to American patients in adjacent beds. The paperwork listed them as enemy wounded in the official designation field but made no distinctions in treatment protocols or medication orders. Military intelligence officers arrived at 1930 hours, expecting to interview prisoners. Harrison intercepted them at the hospital entrance. Surgical recovery patients. Interviews delayed minimum 48 hours by medical directive. He cited regulations prioritizing medical stability over intelligence gathering. The officers departed reluctantly, noting the delay in their reports. Night settled over the 42nd Field Hospital. 2 German pilots occupied recovery beds. American medical personnel monitored their vital signs. Outside, the war continued unabated. Aircraft engines droned overhead, the next day's missions already underway. Artillery fire punctuated the darkness. Yet within the stone farmhouse, a different reality existed temporarily. Medicine had created a haven where enemies received healing hands rather than clenched fists. Winters completed her final rounds at midnight. She paused beside Hoffman's bed, checking the burn dressings personally. The German pilot opened his eyes briefly, recognition flickering across his face. His medical status precluded speaking, but his gaze communicated a question more profound than words could express. Why save the enemy? She adjusted his intravenous line without speaking. The answer would come later, after healing began. For now, the act itself provided sufficient response. 2 enemies had fallen from the sky expecting death if captured. Instead, they found themselves wrapped in American bandages, their lives preserved by the very people they'd been ordered to destroy. The paradox would reshape their understanding of humanity's capacity for compassion amid mechanized destruction. This realization awaited their recovery, a seed planted in trauma that would flower in unexpected ways across the coming decades. For now, they slept under American blankets, breathing with American assistance, their blood mingling with transfused American plasma. Outside the hospital, the war machine ground forward relentlessly. Inside, a different kind of victory had already been secured. Not one measured in territory gained or enemy aircraft destroyed, but in the preservation of principles that transcended the conflict itself. Dawn broke over the 42nd Field Hospital on March 18. Nurses changed burn dressings on Major Hoffman's hands and face. The night had brought fever spikes, expected in severe burn cases. Medical logs recorded temperature fluctuations, medication adjustments, and fluid replacement calculations. Every intervention documented with clinical precision, nationality irrelevant in the notations. Oberleutnant Weber regained consciousness shortly after sunrise. Disorientation gave way to recognition of his circumstances. Ceiling canvas. American voices. Surgical dressings across his abdomen and right leg. The expected prisoner cage or interrogation room replaced by a standard recovery ward. Adjacent beds held wounded American soldiers. No segregation. No visible security measures beyond a single military policeman at the ward entrance. Captain Eleanor Winters conducted morning rounds at 0700 hours. She checked Weber's femoral repair first, assessing circulation and nerve function below the injury site. "Can you feel this?" she asked, touching his foot with a metal probe. Weber nodded, surprise evident in his expression. "Good," she continued in accented German. "No compartment syndrome. Circulation intact." The interaction established the pattern for what followed. Professional. Clinical. Devoid of political or military context. Patient and provider rather than enemy and captor. Weber watched as she moved to Hoffman's bed, performing the same methodical assessment. Burns dressed with advanced sulfa compounds. Airway evaluated. Fluid balance calculated. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison observed from the doorway. Hospital administration demanded his attention elsewhere, yet he found himself drawn to this ward repeatedly. Something unprecedented unfolded here, a microcosm of what peace might resemble after years of mechanized slaughter. "Captain, a word," he called softly. Winters joined him in the corridor. "Command is asking questions about resource allocation." 2 critical enemy wounded receiving full treatment protocols. I need documentation justifying the expenditure. The request carried no judgment, merely acknowledgement of bureaucratic reality. Winters handed him her clipboard. Burn victim recovering with minimal scarring potential due to immediate intervention. Orthopedic case showing excellent vascular integrity post-repair. Both representing textbook response to treatment. Medical value alone justifies the protocols. Harrison nodded, accepting the clinical justification while recognizing the deeper principle at work. And the human value, he asked quietly. Winters met his gaze directly. That justifies everything else, she replied. The exchange complete, they returned to their respective duties. Private Goldstein entered the ward at 0930 hours, carrying fresh dressings for the burn team. He paused at Hoffman's bedside, recognition flowing between rescuer and rescued. The German pilot's eyes widened slightly. This was the American who had pulled him from the burning wreckage. The same hands that now carried medical supplies had dragged him from certain death. Good morning, sir, Goldstein said simply. No elaborate greeting. No reminder of the circumstances that had brought them together. Just acknowledgement of their shared humanity in this moment. Hoffman could not speak through his oxygen mask, but his eyes conveyed what words could not. Sergeant Martinez arrived during afternoon visiting hours. The ward nurse raised an eyebrow. Enemy combatants rarely received visitors beyond intelligence officers. Martinez carried a small bundle under his arm. Checking on my guy, he explained, gesturing toward Weber's bed. The nurse hesitated, then nodded permission. Martinez approached Weber with the directness of combat soldiers everywhere. No pleasantries. No pretense. Brought your things, he said, placing the bundle on the bedside table. Thought you might want them. The package contained Weber's personal effects recovered from the aircraft, his identification papers, a photograph of a young woman, a small notebook. Weber stared at the items, then at Martinez. Why, he asked, the single English word carrying multiple layers of meaning. Why save me? Why return my belongings? Why show kindness to an enemy? Martinez shrugged. War's bad enough without being cruel, he answered. The simplicity of the statement belied its philosophical depth. The interaction caught the attention of an American lieutenant in the adjacent bed. Thomas Reynolds, 101st Airborne, wounded during a reconnaissance patrol. He had watched the exchange with increasing discomfort. That's a Nazi you're being friendly with, Sergeant, he called across the ward. Martinez turned slowly. That's a pilot with a busted leg, Lieutenant. Same as you with your busted arm. We shot him down, he's out of the war. That's enough. The response carried no insubordination, simply statement of fact as Martinez perceived it. Reynolds persisted. Those bastards bombed London. Rotterdam. They're bombing our boys right now. His voice rose, drawing attention throughout the ward. And we're giving them our medicine, our blood. Captain Winters entered during this exchange. She assessed the situation immediately, combat stress reaction manifesting as displaced anger. Common among wounded troops, particularly those facing return to duty. Her approach combined authority with compassion. Lieutenant Reynolds, she said calmly, your objection is noted. She checked his chart before continuing. You received 4 units of plasma after your injury. We don't label blood by nationality or politics. Just blood type and compatibility. She adjusted his intravenous line while speaking. The men who donated it didn't specify who could receive it. Only that it should save lives. The ward fell silent. Reynolds looked away, neither accepting nor rejecting her perspective. Winters continued her rounds, the matter closed from her viewpoint. The fragile ecosystem of the medical ward rebalanced itself around her presence. Major Hoffman developed pneumonia on the 3rd day, a common and dangerous complication in burn patients with smoke inhalation. His temperature spiked to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Respiration became labored despite supplemental oxygen. Medical protocol indicated immediate transfer to a larger facility with specialized equipment. Standard procedure for enemy personnel, basic stabilization until transport to dedicated POW medical facilities became available. The 42 ND's ambulances and medical transport remained reserved for American casualties under normal circumstances. Winters requisitioned a transport vehicle without hesitation. Patient transfer to 8th General Hospital. Priority status. When the transportation officer questioned using resources for an enemy combatant, she replied, "Would you prefer I let a helpless patient die under our care? How does that victory look in your report?" The ambulance departed at 1,400 hours. Lieutenant Sarah Callahan, registered nurse, accompanied the patient. Callahan had lost her fiancé at Bastogne 2 months earlier. She had requested the assignment regardless. "Medicine or revenge," she told Winters. "I choose medicine." The transfer required 6 hours over bomb-cratered roads. Hoffman's condition deteriorated en route. Oxygen supplies ran low. Callahan improvised respiratory support, manually assisting ventilation during critical moments. The German pilot drifted between consciousness and delirium. During one lucid period, he grasped Callahan's wrist. "Why?" he whispered through cracked lips. The same question Weber had asked Martinez. Callahan continued adjusting his intravenous medication. "Because you're someone's son," she answered. Just like he was. No elaboration needed on who he referred to. The war had created millions who existed now only in past tense. The ambulance reached the 8th General Hospital at 2017 hours. Hoffman received immediate intervention, advanced antibiotics, enhanced respiratory support, specialized burn care unavailable at field hospitals. The admitting physician noted in his records, "Enemy combatant transferred from 42nd Field Hospital. Exceptional pre-transfer care evident in wound management and stabilization. Prognosis upgraded based on initial treatment quality." Weber's recovery progressed more rapidly. By the 5th day, he could sit upright with assistance. The femoral repair showed no signs of infection, remarkable given field conditions. His abdominal injuries healed without complication. The medical staff began discussing transfer to a POW facility within the week. Intelligence officers returned, authorization papers in hand. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison reviewed the documents before allowing access. 20 minutes maximum. Patient must maintain stable vitals throughout. Interview terminates at first sign of distress. His medical background emerged in these moments, temporarily superseding military requirements. The intelligence officers conducted their interview within the parameters established. Basic information only, unit designation, mission parameters, aircraft specifications. Weber provided what was asked without resistance. The war had ended for him personally the moment his Messerschmitt struck American soil. One question deviated from the standard interrogation template. "Are you being treated appropriately as a prisoner of war?" the officer asked, following Geneva Convention protocols. Weber glanced at the medical staff before responding. "I am being treated as a person, not a prisoner," he answered carefully. "There is a difference." The response appeared in intelligence summaries reviewed at SHAEF headquarters. General Eisenhower's aides circled the statement during briefing preparation. The Supreme Commander later referenced it when discussing prisoner treatment standards with his staff. "This represents our highest aspiration," he noted. "That even our enemies recognize the difference between necessary captivity and unnecessary cruelty." Private Goldstein received commendation paperwork on the 6th day. The citation read, "Extraordinary heroism in rescuing wounded personnel from a burning aircraft under hazardous conditions." No mention of the rescued airman's nationality appeared in the official language. Harrison had removed that detail deliberately during composition. Goldstein read the citation with discomfort. "Sir, I just did what anyone would do," he told Harrison during the informal presentation. The lieutenant colonel shook his head slightly. "That's precisely why it deserves recognition, Private. Because not everyone would have made the same choice. The 42nd Field Hospital received movement orders on March 25. The front lines had advanced eastward. Medical support needed to follow combat operations. Weber had recovered sufficiently for transfer to a dedicated POW medical facility. The transition point approached where medical necessity would give way to military procedure. Captain Winters conducted her final examination the evening before transfer. Weber's femoral repair had exceeded expectations. 6 weeks of limited mobility followed by physical rehabilitation would restore near normal function. The abdominal injuries showed no complications. Barring unexpected developments, complete recovery seemed probable. "You'll be moved tomorrow," she informed him, maintaining professional detachment. "The receiving facility has appropriate medical capabilities for continued care." No mention of barbed wire or guard towers. No reference to his prisoner status. The medical relationship remained primary in her approach. Weber nodded understanding. Then, breaking protocol, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The gesture bridged multiple divides, captor and prisoner, American and German, victor and defeated. Winters hesitated momentarily before accepting the handshake. No regulations explicitly prohibited this human connection. She had bent many rules already. One more would make little difference. "You're welcome," she replied. "Follow your recovery instructions carefully." Professional advice delivered with subtle undercurrent of personal concern. The interaction lasted seconds but carried significance beyond its brief duration. Medicine had created a space where common humanity emerged between theoretical enemies. The transfer occurred at 0700 hours. Military police arrived with appropriate documentation. Weber was loaded into a specialized ambulance under Sergeant Martinez's supervision. No restraints applied, his medical condition rendered them unnecessary. Martinez ensured proper positioning to protect the healing femoral repair. "Good luck," Martinez said as the ambulance doors closed. The farewell contained no irony or sarcasm. Just acknowledgement of one human to another. Weber nodded in response. Words seemed inadequate for the complex emotions of the moment. The vehicle departed, carrying him toward an uncertain future as a prisoner of war. Yet something fundamental had changed during his brief stay at the 42nd Field Hospital. He had arrived as an enemy. He departed as a patient. News of Major Hoffman reached the 42nd 3 days later. His pneumonia had responded to treatment. The specialized care at the 8th General Hospital had stabilized his condition. Burns healing with minimal complications. Respiratory function improving steadily. Prognosis upgraded to favorable in medical terminology. Lieutenant Callahan received this information during her regular duties. She paused momentarily, allowing herself brief satisfaction in the outcome. Then continued changing dressings on an American soldier's wounds. The cycle continued: injury, treatment, recovery. The pattern transcended uniform color or national allegiance. The 42nd Field Hospital moved 3 times during April 1945 as Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany. Each location brought new casualties, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate the principles established during those March days. Enemy wounded continued arriving alongside American casualties. The protocols remained consistent, triage based on medical necessity rather than uniform insignia. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison received inquiries from division headquarters regarding resource allocation. His reports documented all treatments without differentiation by nationality. When questioned directly about providing advanced care to enemy personnel, his response became standard policy: "We measure our civilization not by how we treat our friends, but by how we treat those who have been our enemies." The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The 42nd Field Hospital staff gathered around a shortwave radio, listening to official announcements. No cheering erupted when the news came. No celebration. Medical personnel had seen too much of war's cost to rejoice loudly at its conclusion. Quiet acknowledgement. Relief. Subdued gratitude that the killing had stopped. Captain Winters wrote in her journal that evening, victory means different things to different people. For some, it's territorial gain or political advantage. For me, it's the moment when medicine can focus on healing without distinction between us and them. By that measure, we achieved victory in March, long before the formal surrender. Redeployment orders arrived in June. The 42nd would return to the United States by August. Decommissioning would follow shortly thereafter. Military necessity giving way to peacetime considerations. Harrison gathered his staff for a final address before the unit began disassembling its equipment. "We have treated 1,724 patients since deployment," he noted from official records. Of those, 211 were classified as enemy personnel. Our survival rate shows no statistical variation between these categories. This represents the true measure of our professional commitment and human compassion. The statement contained no grandiose claims, no philosophical pronouncements. Just numerical confirmation of a principle demonstrated through consistent action. Medicine had maintained its integrity amid history's most destructive conflict. This quiet accomplishment would never appear in headlines or history books, but those who participated understood its significance. Sergeant Martinez received transfer orders to occupation duty in Berlin. Before departing, he visited the POW medical facility where Weber continued his recovery. The meeting required special permission, granted reluctantly by camp authorities. Former enemies were not encouraged to maintain contact. They spoke for 15 minutes in the camp infirmary. Weber now walked with a pronounced limp but without crutches. The American titanium pins in his femur had performed as designed. Martinez brought a small package, coffee and chocolate from his rations, luxuries unavailable to prisoners. "When you get home," Martinez said as he prepared to leave, "remember this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing their interaction, the medical care, the entire improbable sequence. "Tell them not all Americans are what they might have heard." Weber nodded understanding. "And you tell them the same about us," he replied. The reciprocal request acknowledged shared humanity beneath the artificial divisions of war. Martinez extended his hand. Weber took it without hesitation. The handshake represented something neither could articulate fully, recognition that manufactured hatred need not persist beyond conflict's end. Private Goldstein received his discharge papers in September 1945. His citation for rescuing Major Hoffman appeared in the documentation, though his post-war employers would never fully comprehend its significance. He returned to Brooklyn, enrolled in medical school under the GI Bill, and began the long process of transforming wartime experience into peacetime purpose. During his medical residency, Goldstein encountered a burn case reminiscent of Hoffman's injuries. As he directed treatment, a nurse commented on his unusual expertise with such wounds. "I had a good teacher," he replied simply. The war had provided education no civilian institution could match. Captain Winters remained in the Army Medical Corps until 1947. Her experiences with the 42nd formed the foundation for training protocols she developed for military medical personnel. Her emphasis on treatment without political distinction became standard procedure during the occupation period, when medical facilities served mixed populations of Americans, Allies, and former enemy civilians. She lectured at Walter Reed Army Medical Center after returning to the United States. One presentation addressed ethical considerations in combat medicine. "The moment we begin distinguishing patients by uniform rather than medical need," she told the assembled physicians, "we compromise the fundamental principle of our profession. Medicine must remain neutral territory, even when nothing else is." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison retired from military service in 1946. His final efficiency report noted, "exceptional leadership during combat operations. Maintained highest professional standards while balancing military necessity against humanitarian considerations." The bureaucratic language couldn't capture what he had enabled, a space where medicine's healing mission temporarily suspended war's destructive imperatives. Major Hoffman spent 6 months in American military hospitals before transfer to a POW facility. His burns healed with minimal scarring, remarkable given their initial severity. Respiratory function returned to near normal levels. The medical records documented his case as an example of advanced burn treatment techniques developed during combat operations. He returned to Germany in late 1946 as part of prisoner exchanges following the surrender. The country he found bore little resemblance to what he had left. Cities reduced to rubble. Infrastructure destroyed. Population traumatized by defeat and emerging awareness of regime atrocities. Reconstruction seemed impossible amid such comprehensive devastation. Hoffman's medical training before the war provided unexpected opportunity during this period. Physicians were desperately needed throughout the occupation zones. His status as former Luftwaffe officer initially created obstacles, but the severe shortage of medical personnel eventually overcame political considerations. He established a small practice in Munich by 1948. His patients included both Germans and American occupation personnel. The latter came initially through official channels, then increasingly through word-of-mouth recommendations. His experience with American medical techniques during his own treatment provided unusual perspective for treating occupation forces. Oberleutnant Weber returned to Germany in early 1946. His hometown near Dresden now lay in the Soviet occupation zone. He relocated to Hamburg in the British sector, finding work in commercial shipping as Germany's economy slowly rebuilt. The American titanium pins in his leg occasionally triggered questions during medical examinations. Each time, he recounted the story of his treatment at the 42nd Field Hospital. The narrative remained consistent over decades, not embellished for dramatic effect or altered to minimize his role as former enemy. Just accurate description of unexpected compassion received when he anticipated imprisonment or neglect. The titanium pins became physical evidence supporting this account, medical technology literally embedded within him. Lieutenant Sarah Callahan left military service in 1945, returning to civilian nursing in Boston. Her experience treating enemy personnel influenced her approach to patient care throughout her subsequent career. When colleagues expressed prejudice toward patients of different backgrounds, she often responded, "I once kept a German pilot alive in an ambulance for 6 hours. Medicine doesn't have time for politics." The statement became her professional philosophy, direct, uncompromising, rooted in battlefield reality. Hospital administrators occasionally found her perspective challenging, but patients benefited from her ability to see beyond superficial differences to underlying human needs. Sergeant Ray Martinez settled in California after military service, establishing a construction company that participated in post-war building expansion. His experience with Weber informed his hiring practices, focusing on capability rather than background or nationality. The company eventually employed several German immigrants, former Wehrmacht soldiers who had emigrated to America seeking new beginnings. When questioned about this policy by more traditional competitors, Martinez responded with characteristic directness, "I judge men by what they do now, not what uniform they once wore." The approach proved commercially successful while quietly demonstrating reconciliation's practical value in civilian context. In 1957, the American Medical Association invited several European physicians to observe new surgical techniques being developed at major teaching hospitals. Major Hoffman, now Dr. Ernst Hoffman, received one of these invitations through professional channels. The selection process had not identified his wartime background or previous experience as a patient in American military hospitals. The conference location, Boston, Massachusetts. The hosting institution, Massachusetts General Hospital. Among the nursing staff, Sarah Callahan, formerly Lieutenant Callahan of the 42nd Field Hospital. Neither recognized the other immediately. 12 years had passed. Circumstances had changed dramatically. The connection emerged during a demonstration of respiratory support equipment. Hoffman made a technical observation regarding oxygen flow rates for burn patients. Callahan noted the unusual specificity of his knowledge. "Experience?" she asked during a break in the presentation. "Personal or professional?" "Both," he replied. March 1945. Smoke inhalation and third-degree burns. American Field Hospital followed by the 8th General. He rolled back his sleeve, revealing the characteristic scarring pattern on his forearm. I was a patient before I was a doctor. Recognition dawned in Callahan's eyes. The ambulance transfer, she said quietly. Oxygen running low. Manual ventilation support. She studied his face more carefully, seeing beyond the present to the burn patient from 12 years earlier. You had pneumonia complications. I didn't think you'd make it to the 8th General alive. Hoffman nodded slowly. I remember very little of the transfer. Fever dreams mostly. But I remember a nurse who wouldn't let me die. Who kept saying breathe, just breathe 4 hours. He extended his hand. Dr. Ernst Hoffman, formerly Major, Luftwaffe. Sarah Callahan, formerly Lieutenant, Army Nurse Corps. She accepted the handshake without hesitation. You survived. The simple observation carried layers of meaning, medical satisfaction in a positive outcome, human connection transcending former enemy status, acknowledgement of war's long shadow extending into peace. They spoke briefly during the conference reception that evening. Professional courtesy initially, then gradually exploring the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together again across an ocean and more than a decade. Hoffman expressed what he had been unable to articulate during his treatment, gratitude for care received when he had expected imprisonment or neglect. I've often wondered, he said carefully, why your hospital treated enemy personnel with such humanity. It wasn't standard practice on either side. The question contained no accusation, merely genuine curiosity about an approach that had deviated from wartime norms. Callahan considered before responding. Captain Winters established that standard from the beginning. Medicine first, military consideration second. She sipped her coffee before continuing. She said once that how we treated enemy wounded would define us more clearly than anything else we did during the war. The conversation shifted to their respective post-war experiences. Hoffman described rebuilding his life amid Germany's physical and moral devastation. Callahan outlined her transition to civilian practice. Both had carried their wartime experiences into peace, not as trauma to be suppressed, but as perspective that informed their professional approach. Would you be willing to meet some of my colleagues? Hoffman asked as the reception concluded. Your perspective on international medical cooperation would be valuable. The invitation extended beyond professional courtesy to something more significant, reconciliation given practical expression through shared purpose. Callahan agreed. The meeting occurred 2 days later, informal discussion among medical professionals from former enemy nations. No politicians present, no diplomatic agendas, just practitioners focused on healing rather than historical grievances. The conversation ranged from technical advances to ethical considerations in modern medicine. One German physician, unaware of Hoffman's personal history, expressed surprise at American willingness to share medical innovations so soon after the war. Weren't these techniques developed for your military personnel? He asked. Why provide them to former enemies? Before Callahan could respond, Hoffman answered. Because medicine transcends such distinctions, he said quietly. I learned this personally in 1945. He shared his experience as a patient in American military hospitals, describing the care received when he had expected punishment or neglect. The account shifted the conversation's tone entirely. Other participants began sharing similar stories, moments when professional ethics had superseded national animosity. The exchange revealed a pattern beyond individual anecdotes. Medicine had maintained its integrity even as other institutions succumbed to wartime corruption of purpose. Callahan added her perspective as a provider rather than recipient. We treated patients, not uniforms, she explained. The medical needs determine the care, not the nationality. The principle seemed obvious stated this way, yet its implementation during active conflict had required deliberate choice against prevailing military culture. News of this impromptu meeting reached Samuel Goldstein, now Dr. Goldstein, practicing medicine in Boston. The coincidence seemed improbable, the German pilot he had rescued from burning wreckage now attending a medical conference in the same city. Yet verification came through professional channels. The name matched. The burn history aligned with his recollection. Goldstein arranged a meeting through conference organizers. The encounter occurred in Massachusetts General Hospital's main lobby, neutral territory for this improbable reunion. He recognized Hoffman immediately despite the years between. The burns had healed remarkably well, leaving only faint scarring visible to trained eyes. "Dr. Hoffman," he said, extending his hand. "Samuel Goldstein. Formerly private, 42nd Field Hospital." Understanding registered immediately in the German physician's expression. This was the medic who had pulled him from the burning Messerschmitt. The young soldier who had shielded him from debris when the aircraft exploded. "You," Hoffman said simply. The single word contained volumes: recognition, memory, realization of how much he owed this man standing before him. "You got me out." No elaborate greeting. No dramatic declaration. Just acknowledgement of the fundamental fact: without Goldstein's intervention, he would have died in that burning cockpit on March 17, 1945. They moved to the hospital cafeteria, finding a quiet corner where privacy facilitated conversation. Other physicians glanced curiously at the intense discussion between American and German colleagues. None could have guessed the extraordinary circumstances of their previous meeting: enemy combatants connected through fire, rescue, and medical intervention. "I've always wondered," Goldstein said after they had exchanged professional backgrounds, "what you were thinking when you saw an American pulling you from the aircraft. Were you afraid I would harm you?" The question had remained with him through medical school and into practice, how the rescue appeared from the opposite perspective. Hoffman considered carefully before answering. "I remember confusion mostly. Training told me capture meant interrogation or worse. Reality presented something entirely different: an enemy risking his life to save mine." He gestured to the hospital around them. "This became possible because of that moment. Everything I've done is a physician links back to your decision that day." The acknowledgement carried no melodrama, just honest assessment of causality. Without Goldstein's intervention, Hoffman's future contributions to medicine would never have existed. Lives saved through his post-war practice represented an extension of that single rescue act. The ripple effect continued decades later, touching patients who would never know its origin. Their conversation extended beyond the scheduled time. Professional experiences. Ethical challenges. The evolution of medicine since the war. Throughout, the extraordinary nature of their connection remained unspoken background: former enemies now colleagues united by shared commitment to healing. As they prepared to part, Hoffman reached into his pocket and removed a small object, a lighter made from aircraft aluminum. "This was fashioned from a piece of my Messerschmitt," he explained. "A reminder of that day." He handed it to Goldstein. "I think it belongs with you more than me." The gesture represented more than a souvenir. The transformed metal symbolized their own transformation, from enemies defined by national conflict to individuals connected through human recognition. Goldstein accepted the gift with understanding of its significance beyond monetary value. News of these reunions reached Raymond Martinez in California through veterans networks. The construction company owner had maintained sporadic contact with Weber over the years, occasional letters exchanged through international mail. The correspondence represented unusual connection between former combatants, yet neither man found it strange. Their shared experience had established communication channels outside normal post-war boundaries. Martinez contacted conference organizers, learning that Weber was not among the German delegation. Hoffman, however, confirmed Weber's current location and professional status during conversation with Goldstein. This information traveled back to Martinez through informal channels, eventually enabling direct communication with both German veterans. The exchange developed into something unprecedented: plans for a formal reunion of individuals connected through the extraordinary events of March 1945. Not a military gathering. Not diplomatic reconciliation orchestrated by governments. Just personal acknowledgement of shared experience that transcended national divisions. Eleanor Winters, now director of nursing at a major Chicago hospital, received invitation to this gathering through Callahan. The former captain had maintained her principles throughout post-war career, establishing training protocols that emphasized medical ethics above political considerations. Her approach influenced a generation of nursing students trained under her supervision. "I'm not sure what purpose such a reunion would serve," she replied initially. Her focus remained on present challenges rather than past experiences. The war had provided valuable lessons, but she had integrated these into professional practice without dwelling on specific incidents. Callahan's response proved persuasive. "The German pilots want to thank those who saved them. That includes you most of all. Your decisions established the foundation for everything that followed." The observation acknowledged Winter's central role in creating the environment where humanitarian treatment became standard practice rather than exception. James Harrison, the former lieutenant colonel, received his invitation while serving as medical director at Veterans Administration. His administrative role had expanded post-war, focusing on improving care standards for those who had served. The principles established at the 42nd Field Hospital informed his approach to institutional management, balancing procedural requirements against individual needs. "Remarkable that they remember after all this time," he commented to his secretary. The observation contained no dismissal, merely surprise at the persistence of memory across decades. He had commanded hundreds of medical personnel, overseen thousands of cases. That these particular patients recalled specific treatment reflected something beyond routine medical care. The reunion location required careful consideration. Germany remained politically sensitive as Cold War tensions intensified. The United States carried associations with occupation authority for many Germans. Neutral territories seemed appropriate for this unprecedented gathering. Switzerland provided suitable venue, its medical institutions having maintained neutrality throughout the conflict. The University Hospital Zurich hosted the meeting in June 1958. No publicity surrounded the event. No official recognition from governments or military organizations. Just private acknowledgement among individuals whose lives had intersected during history's most destructive conflict. Hoffman arrived first, accompanied by Weber. The former Oberleutnant had established successful maritime insurance practice in Hamburg, his military experience providing useful perspective on risk assessment for commercial shipping. The American titanium pins in his leg had become conversation piece during business meetings, tangible evidence of unexpected connection between former enemies. "I'm not sure why I'm nervous," Weber commented as they waited in the hospital conference room. "These people saved our lives. Why should meeting them again cause anxiety?" The observation highlighted the complex emotions surrounding their status, gratitude mingled with awareness of former enemy identity, appreciation shadowed by memory of the circumstances that had necessitated medical intervention. Goldstein and Callahan arrived together, having traveled from Boston on the same flight. Martinez joined them shortly thereafter, his construction company now successful enough to afford European travel without financial strain. Each carried personal recollection of the events that had brought them together, distinct perspectives on shared experience. When Winters entered with Harrison, the gathering achieved completion. The former captain had changed little physically, still carrying herself with the composed authority that had directed a combat hospital under extraordinary circumstances. Harrison had aged more visibly, administrative responsibilities etching deeper lines around eyes that had witnessed too much suffering during war years. Introductions proceeded awkwardly at first. Military ranks no longer applied, yet civilian titles seemed inadequate for acknowledging their shared history. They settled into conversation gradually, beginning with professional updates before addressing the circumstances that had connected them across enemy lines. "I've often wondered," Weber said during this transition, "why you didn't treat us as enemies. It would have been easier, perhaps even expected." The question contained no accusation, merely genuine curiosity about decisions that had deviated from wartime norms. Harrison deferred to Winters, acknowledging her primacy in establishing treatment protocols. She considered before responding, her words measured as always. "Medicine provided the only neutral territory in a world consumed by conflict," she explained. Preserving that neutrality became more important than contributing to the division. The answer satisfied intellectually, but Weber pressed further. That explains institutional policy. I'm asking about personal choice. Why did individuals, he gestured toward Martinez and Goldstein, choose to see us as human beings rather than enemies? They had lost friends to our air forces. They had every reason for hatred. Martinez answered with characteristic directness. Hatred is easy during battle. Much harder when you're looking at a wounded man who can't fight back. He shrugged slightly. My brother wrote me before he died at Normandy. Said we were fighting to prove we were better than what we fought against. Letting you die would have made his death meaningless. The statement contained no sentimentality, just pragmatic assessment from a combat veteran's perspective. The choice as he perceived it had never been about abstract humanitarian principles. Just practical demonstration of the values that justified American participation in the conflict. Goldstein added his perspective, addressing Hoffman directly. When I saw your aircraft burning, I didn't see a German pilot. Just someone who would die without immediate help. He glanced at Winters before continuing. Captain, sorry, Ms. Winters, had established that standard from our first day. The uniform never determined the treatment. Hoffman nodded understanding. This approach was not common, he noted. Many of my comrades who became prisoners received minimal care at best. Some received none. The observation carried no accusation, merely acknowledgement of contrast between their experience and broader patterns. Winters accepted this assessment without defensiveness. We couldn't change the entire medical system. We could only ensure that patients under our care received treatment based on medical need rather than political category. Her statement acknowledged the limited scope of their impact while defending the principle behind their approach. The conversation continued through lunch, served in the conference room to maintain privacy. They exchanged perspectives on how the experience had influenced their subsequent lives, professional choices, ethical frameworks, approaches to conflict resolution. Common threads emerged despite their diverse backgrounds and wartime roles. Hoffman described establishing his medical practice amid Germany's post-war devastation. I implemented what I had learned as your patient, he told the American medical personnel. The approach transcended national boundaries. It worked equally well for German civilians and American occupation forces. Weber outlined his business development in similar terms. Trust must be established between former adversaries for commerce to function, he explained. The medical treatment I received became my model for post-war relationships. Professional respect first, allowing personal connections to develop gradually. Martinez described hiring German immigrants in his construction company. Skills matter more than background, he stated. Results speak louder than history. The practical application of reconciliation had proven commercially successful while demonstrating reintegration's value in civilian context. Callahan and Goldstein shared how their wartime experiences treating enemy personnel had influenced their medical practices. I've never turned away a patient based on background or appearance, Goldstein noted. That standard was established in March 1945 and never changed. Throughout these exchanges, Harrison observed more than participated. As administrative head of the 42nd Field Hospital, he had enabled the approach without directly implementing it. His contribution lay in creating space where medical personnel could follow ethical imperatives without interference from military authorities. The paperwork was creative, he acknowledged when asked about resource allocation for enemy personnel. Official forms didn't have categories for what we were doing. I adapted procedures to accommodate reality rather than forcing reality to fit procedures. The administrative flexibility had provided practical foundation for principled care. As afternoon progressed, conversation shifted from past experiences to current challenges. Cold War tensions. Nuclear proliferation. Ideological divisions threatening renewed conflict. Each participant brought professional perspective to these discussions, medicine, business, administration, military experience informing varied approaches to contemporary issues. The same principle applies, Winters noted during this exchange. See the human being beyond the category. Respond to individual reality rather than abstract classification. The approach that had guided medical treatment during war offered framework for addressing international tensions during uneasy peace. Before departing, they gathered for a photograph, former enemies and rescuers together in single frame. No formal poses, no military stiffness, just individuals connected through extraordinary circumstances. The image would never appear in history books or official records. Its significance remained private among those who understood its context. Hoffman spoke for both German participants as the gathering concluded. "You provided more than medical treatment," he told the Americans. "You demonstrated what becomes possible when professional ethics transcend national identity. This lesson proved more valuable than the physical healing." The statement captured the reunion's significance beyond personal reconciliation. These individuals had maintained human connection across artificial boundaries created by governments and military authorities. Their experience offered template for larger reconciliation between nations divided by historical grievances. They parted with handshakes rather than formal farewells. No elaborate speeches marked the occasion's conclusion. Just acknowledgement of shared experience that had transcended conventional categories. Former enemies had become colleagues united by recognition of common humanity beneath superficial divisions. The gathering received no public attention. No newspaper coverage documented this extraordinary reunion. Its significance remained private among participants rather than becoming symbolic gesture for political purposes. The absence of publicity preserved its authenticity as personal reconciliation rather than public demonstration. Each participant returned to their professional responsibilities carrying renewed perspective. Winters continued developing nursing education programs emphasizing ethical components alongside technical skills. Harrison implemented administrative reforms at Veterans Administration, reducing bureaucratic obstacles to individualized care. Goldstein, Callahan, Hoffman and Weber applied the experience to their respective practices. Martinez returned to California with reinforced conviction regarding his hiring practices. The construction company continued employing workers based on skills rather than background, demonstrating successful integration when many businesses maintained discriminatory patterns. His approach influenced industry standards beyond his immediate operation. Communications continued among these individuals through correspondence rather than additional in-person meetings. Personal updates. Professional developments. Observations about international relations as Cold War progressed. The exchange represented unusual connection across former enemy lines when most veterans maintained distance from wartime opponents. Weber's letter to Martinez in 1961 captured this exceptional relationship. "Strange to think that being shot down by your fighters became the most fortunate event of my war experience. Without that crash, we would never have learned what becomes possible when enemies see each other as human beings first." The observation highlighted their shared understanding. Catastrophe had created opportunity for recognition across artificial divisions. What began as military disaster had transformed into demonstration of possibility beyond conflict. This perspective provided framework for viewing contemporary challenges from multiple angles rather than single national perspective. Hoffman continued attending medical conferences in the United States, eventually establishing formal exchange program between German and American physicians. The initiative facilitated knowledge transfer while creating personal connections across national boundaries. Though never explicitly stated, the program's philosophy derived directly from his experience as patient in American military hospitals. Winters received invitation to lecture at German medical schools during the 1960s. Her presentations emphasized ethical foundations of nursing practice, using wartime experiences to illustrate principles applicable during peace. The approach resonated particularly in Germany, where medical professionals struggled to rebuild professional ethics after systematic corruption during Nazi period. The 42nd Field Hospital's approach became case study in military medical training, not through official recognition, but through personal influence of those who had served there. Winters, Harrison, Callahan and Goldstein shared their experiences with younger generations of medical personnel, emphasizing the principle that had guided their practice: medicine must maintain its integrity even when all other institutions succumb to wartime corruption. Hoffman preserved his medical records from American treatment, eventually donating these documents to medical archives along with personal commentary regarding their significance. The materials provided rare documentation of enemy personnel care practices during combat operations, historical evidence of humanitarian principles maintained amid mechanized destruction. Harrison summarized this legacy in correspondence with Winters before his retirement in 1967. What we established at the 42nd never appeared in official histories or received formal recognition. Yet its influence continues through those who experienced its approach firsthand, both providers and recipients. Perhaps this represents more meaningful legacy than any medal or citation. Weber attended Martinez's funeral in 1973, traveling from Hamburg specifically for this purpose. His presence surprised the construction company employees, many unaware of their employer's unusual connection to former enemies. Weber explained their relationship in simple terms: "He helped me when he could have left me to die." Everything else followed from that single decision. The statement captured essential truth behind their reconciliation. Individual choices during crisis had established foundation for subsequent understanding. Martinez had seen wounded human being rather than enemy combatant. This perception created possibility for relationship transcending national categories and historical grievances. Hoffman and Goldstein maintained professional correspondence until Goldstein's death in 1982. Their exchange explored developments in burn treatment techniques, comparing approaches across international boundaries. The collaboration produced several joint publications improving patient outcomes in both countries, tangible legacy of connection established through rescue and treatment rather than combat. Winters received Humanitarian Award from International Medical Organization in 1985. Her acceptance speech acknowledged the 42nd Field Hospital team without whom her approach would have remained theoretical rather than practical. Medicine provides unique opportunity to demonstrate what becomes possible when we recognize common humanity beneath superficial differences, she noted. Our experience during war proved this principle applicable under history's most challenging circumstances. Captain Eleanor Winters died in 1988. Her obituary mentioned 40 years of nursing education alongside brief reference to military service. No details regarding enemy personnel treatment appeared in public notices. The omission reflected her lifelong approach: focus on principles rather than personal recognition, substance rather than symbolism. Only those who had experienced the 42 ND's approach firsthand understood its significance. Yet its influence extended far beyond direct participants through medical practices they established during peacetime careers. Individual patients benefited from approach developed under combat conditions without ever knowing its origins in wartime crisis. Weber attended Hoffman's funeral in Munich in 1992. The former pilot had become last surviving member of their extraordinary connection. His eulogy mentioned American medical personnel without whom Hoffman's distinguished career would never have existed. They demonstrated that humanity can persist where we least expect to find it, he concluded. Everything Ernst accomplished as physician extended from that single demonstration. The statement captured essential truth behind their shared experience. Individual choices during war's chaos had created space where common humanity emerged despite systematic efforts to suppress this recognition. Military training, propaganda, combat experience, all designed to reinforce enemy categorization, had failed against direct human connection established through medical necessity. Weber lived until 2001, last survivor of the events that had connected enemy combatants through unexpected compassion. Before his death, he summarized this connection in letter to Callahan's daughter: "They could have seen only the uniform, the aircraft markings, the enemy classification. Instead, they chose to see the person beneath these artificial distinctions." This choice made reconciliation possible when nothing else could have.